Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for this super exciting panel on unleashing faculty innovation, people, pedagogy, and practice. Unfortunately, Sean Decatur was not able to join us today, but we will go forward without him. I'd like to start this panel by framing a key organizing question, which is what are the possibilities for faculty innovation that have opened up in this moment? And of course, how do we unleash those possibilities for innovation? So let's start by framing the moment and hearing perspectives from each of our panelists about why this time in higher education is unique. So the first thing I'd like for each of you to do is just reflect on one shift that you've seen in the field in the last 6 months that have made it poised for innovation in your perspective. And let's start with David.
Well, great. Obviously, we've seen a lot of shifts in our own personal lives and professional lives. But I think the most interesting dynamic to consider is this notion that we're now trying to reach people when their schedules are upturned. They have children at home, they're working from home, and it highlights the opportunity to think about synchronous and asynchronous kind of delivery of education, especially as we think about the preciousness of our either face-to-face or even synchronous types of experiences like this with Zoom. And so I think for the first time, and back to Dr. Turkle's comments, the time we have together is so precious that it's really putting pressure on us to think about how do we deliver static content, how do we deliver one-way communications as efficiently as possible, so that it frees up our time to do those things which are most important, which is establish those relationships and have substantive types of engagements. And for us as an open access institution, with mostly adult learners who are focusing on families and work, helping them figure out when and where they can do their work and still carve out some time for real-time interactions on demand, I think is an incredible opportunity for us moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, what do you think?
So, I mean, the shift to online is one part of the equation, but I think another part that we're aware of, since we focus so much on computer science students, is the shortage of computer science professors. When you're moving online, you don't have the benefit of a lot of the organic interactions and support that your students, especially the disadvantaged students, had when they're on these campuses. So it's more critical than ever when you have a shortage of professors, a shortage of support, for you to think about how can we design around that. So this challenge, I view it as an opportunity for us to put professors first, front and center. How do we reimagine how we support them so that we have a much more personalized, much more student-centered classroom, even though we don't have the same infrastructure that we had before?
Yeah, great point, really interesting. And Mark, what about you?
Yeah, I think this has in some ways unleashed a lot of creativity that we've probably needed in terms of getting our instructional muscle behind. We've had for a long time the wars between what's better online or in class. And I think this has in some ways done a couple things. One, it's blown up that notion because now a lot of that creative energy that was focused on the class is now focused leveraging different tools. The challenge is you've had some simplistic conflation where people assume that forced remote learning is the same as the kind of discipline of online learning we've had for the last 20 years. There is a lot of thoughtful, effective online practice that people are now beginning to learn from. And what that's led to is a lot of very talented faculty members, teachers out there, and even parents who've now kind of put their toe in the water and are diving full blast into what people have learned around this. And I would just point to kind of three big things. One is you see a lot of work around content, context, and community. What I mean is a lot of work around innovative ways to pull in the best possible content. So embrace of open education, the embrace of all the different kind of curricular resources that are out there and how you can possibly bring those to your students. Because you know that in the end, connecting your students to that great content is often going to be game changing. The second one is around context, which is getting them to, in a virtual environment, synchronous or asynchronous, to experience and have some contextual-based learning work. So for example, we've been using a program called Immersion, which is a VR tool, which allows people to kind of walk into a virtual classroom and literally see what it's like to work with a special education student, what it's like to actually be a part of a DEI incident, and how is the teacher going to react to that. And then the last one is very similar to what Sherry was just talking about, which is the notion of community, which is how do we connect the teacher to the student in different ways? How do you connect the students to each other in different ways? How do we connect the students to a broader community of learning and get them engaged in that? And so in short, I just think this has allowed a whole bunch of really innovative faculty members to point their innovation engine towards a new challenge. And that challenge is, how do we use these tools to actually help people learn well and finish strong?
Yeah, those are really great points. And one thing that I want to, highlight in what you said was, this idea that there's a lot of conflation happening between, high quality online education, which, as you said, has been around for many, many years, and then what's happening right now, which is this emergency remote learning. And so I would love to just delve in a little bit more on, the innovation that's happening within online teaching and how there are so many different levels to that innovation. Michael, could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I would love to. And there are quite a number of levels, and I think most of where we see a lot of current courses, they're more at a level 0 or a level 1. And think of level 0 as you're basically doing the same thing that you were doing before. You turn on your Zoom, you still do your lecture. It's very passive. You're not interactive or engaging. So it's pretty much kind of the same, and it's generally not a very good experience for a lot of students. Level 1, think about that as a flipped classroom. So maybe you record the lecture in advance, maybe you're assigning homework in advance, maybe the in-person or the live interaction with your students is something that is much more engaging. There's a minimum of the lecture time, maybe that's 30 minutes or less of an hour-long lecture or hour-long session. And then moving beyond that, like level 2, you get into how can I have students connecting with other students, small groups or small pods, breakout rooms. Level 3, moving into more personalization. And then I think of that as kind of the right fit for the right audience. And I'll give you all an example of what I would consider to be a level 3 or maybe even a level 4. So CodePath currently has 1,000 students that are taking 12-week, 150-hour summer course. And we personalized by having assessment. So even though there's one course, we end up right-sizing the fit so that it will take students on average around 8 to 12 hours to complete each of the assignments. And so a student is mapped in one of these 3 different sections, depending upon where they currently are. Correlates to really high completion rates, where we're seeing around 95% completion for this free online course. You have major increases in student confidence, where students feel like it's the right pacing for them, high satisfaction. And then we also have around 150 professional engineer mentors for every 250 students in the course. So there's a lot of different ways that you can think of the different levels in your classroom, and that you can learn about what's the right fit for you based on what you have access to and your resources.
Yeah, and I think another important piece to that is the institutional nuance itself, right? Because innovation happens differently in different institutions. David, could you talk a little bit about how institutional nuances may bring different challenges into how you think about innovation?
Yeah, and I think our not just our institutional nuances, but some of the structural givens in higher education or education in general are limiting factors to getting to that highest level of personalization. And one is the course structure itself. The notion that you learn in a course with one professor still is prevailing through all of this. And so the model that Michael talked about, where you're deploying large numbers of people who are human capital that's capable of providing student support on demand at the right time for the right student. And that challenges not just an institutional nuance. because I think we're closer to that than most because we're non-traditional and only 50 years old and still pretty gritty, as is Mark's operation. But we're still forced into some regulatory and structural ways of delivering support to students that perpetuate a really traditional faculty model, which is I'm responsible for these students for a fixed period of time. And we're still giving out very little information with Mark's help from his previous role. We're giving more information than the past, but you're still giving slices of information and deploying one person to support a student for a fixed period of time. It really limits our ability to personalize or become much more precise in meeting the needs of students. So I think some universities and institutions have a clearer pathway forward than others, but we're still under the mindset that I have total authority in my classroom for a fixed period of time. When I joined National, in my interview to become president, they said they had this innovative format of 1 month format. I said, when did you come up with that? They said 1971. Well, maybe that short-term format it's still a fixed period of time with students assigned to one person. So I think the fundamental challenges we're going to get to is how do we deploy the right type of student support, given all the human capital we have at our disposal.
Yeah. Yeah, and so Mark, given that, I'd love to get your perspective on how would you get started? How do you move beyond just thinking about, putting the course online?
Yeah, I think you go back to first principles, right? And so the first principle is about trying to, one, create a relationship with that student that's real and authentic. So you have an idea of meeting them where they are to take them where they need to go. Second is get to some clarity about what are you trying to achieve in that instructional experience. And that instructional experience can be varied, and understanding what are the resources at your disposal to make that work. And then as you're doing that work, really figure out how you can personalize that experience to make it really engaging with that individual and help them go on that instructional journey. So, I mean, Western Governors, for example, from the beginning has been focused on this idea of creating a personal connection with our learners as they go on their journey, whether it's the long journey for the micro-credential or the degree, or it's just learning in that moment. And part of our feeling has always been learning-centered education, which is like, let's determine what that learning goal is, get you the best curated resources possible to be able to understand and engage in it, connect with the right people to be able to do that. And then once you've mastered that learning goal, let's go to the next, right? So I think one of again, going back to first principles is who are you, and knowing who you are and the kind of gifts you're going to bring to it, who's the person you're trying to reach, build that connection, understand what they're trying to learn, then you figure out the resources at your disposal. And I'll go back to that whole notion of content, context, community. I think those 3 C's are the simplest framework. And I kind of stole those from Kay Patricia Cross, who was a longtime researcher at Berkeley, who talked about what we know about brain research and what works in learning. And it clearly carries over to this work, which is from there, you really figure out how you can connect that student to the best content possible, the best context so they can understand whatever they're learning in context. So there's something special about learning in context. And even like learning math in context. So if they care about athletics, you teach them math as they understand math related to athletics. If they care about healthcare and they need to learn something about sociology, it's sociology within healthcare, right? The contextual side of it just brings things to life. And I think we've learned, and I think David and Michael will agree on this, we've atomized education. We teach general education over here, we teach math over here, and that atomization, that breaking apart of it has really caused some challenges. So that contextualization matters. And then that community matters, which that person just cannot feel like they're alone. And there are lots of paths to community, by the way. That community can sometimes be one-on-one. So again, our students will meet with a program mentor every week at minimum. And then they'll meet with course instructors as they need based on the learning experience, but all kinds of personal connections for them. And then they meet with peers, they meet with mentors, and we kind of connect them out. And from there, you can't neglect the idea of connecting those students to a community of learners beyond your institution, beyond your framework. So there's a whole community of learners they can connect with. So for me, those are the simplest practices. And by the way, I think those practices work for K-12 teachers, they work for higher ed, they work for employer-based learning leaders, and by the way, they work for parents. There are millions of parents right now that are scrambling, trying to figure out how they can help their students, their teachers, support their kids, right? And one of the best things they can do is they themselves kind of own some of this learning enterprise, and again, connect their child to the best content, context, and community.
Yeah, those are great practices for innovation. Thanks for sharing that. Michael and David, do you have other practices that you leverage for innovation?
I think one of the things in relation to what Mark said, and I love those three pillars,
Yeah,
is that the paying attention to the scheduling and the times when you can make those connections and making those as flexible as possible, given the diversity of demands on people, especially now. Even access to the technology. We have students that have one computer and two kids trying to do their homework, and a mother and a father both trying to do their homework, working from remotely. And then if any one of those adults trying to go to school, on top of that, it puts more demands on not just the technology, but the scheduling of that. So, even the flexibility of peer scheduling, when you shouldn't, the notion of fixed periods of time where this work is getting done is really eroding pretty quickly. I taught last October. One of the best students I've ever had in my career was doing her work at 2:00 in the morning because she had 3 kids at home. She had a husband that was disabled, and she was working a full-time job. And how do I give her support at on live support at 2:00 in the morning? Do we deploy a set of other people, other human capital, or am I expected to do that? Or does she have to wait until she's back at work for me to give her the feedback that's necessary? Or do we automate some of that feedback? So I think that time constraint that we're under right now is a critical factor in the way we think about it. And we're used to teaching courses at fixed periods of time and having office hours at fixed periods of time. And that just doesn't work in this environment.
Hey, Jessica, just to jump in on that, David hit a couple of points that are just so on target. One is this pandemic has shined a bright light on digital equity issues in this country. I mean, we have parents that are in McDonald's parking lots trying to get on Wi-Fi to download PDFs for their kids' worksheets, to try to download their own work pack. It is heartbreaking. And the institutions out there are so many institutions that are working hard. We have a good friend of mine is president of Austin Community College, Richard Rhodes, and they've turned all their parking lots into hotspots so that their students have a place to come get content. But one of the things that's pretty clear is we have a national imperative right now to try to get more digital equity. It's the equivalent of the interstate highway system or the rural electrification projects. We have work to do to get that, to get that digital equity issue. The second is around a lot of our learners are not struggling with content at all. They're struggling with basic needs. It is housing insecurity, food insecurity, transportation, and the rest. And just if you go to hopeforcollege.org, the Hope Center at Temple has really done work at talking about what can you do during COVID to really kind of meet those students. At Western Governors, we've actually piloted the Equity app, and what we've tried to do is get emergency aid grants directly to the students as quickly as possible, because what often that student is not struggling with calculus, they're struggling with their car breaking down, right? They're struggling with unemployment. And David just hit it right on the head, which is part of our innovation is actually understanding that student's real life and understanding how we can support them in that real life moment.
Mark, I really appreciate you bringing up the equity angle. It's so critical. And I think that there's a part of this, how do we bridge this gap for students that is important to touch base on, which is how do we also decrease the friction for educators and for professors? There was already a lot that we expected of them. And then in this environment, I think that there's unique opportunities for them to be able to learn a lot more quickly. So all of these educators have these live online classrooms, many of them Zoom classrooms like this. So they can audit, they can jump into to see what other educators are doing. And some professors are really, really good already. You can jump into the live classroom, see how they're doing it, talk to them afterwards. We've never had this opportunity before to look inside other professors' classrooms to see what they're doing. So the different levels I outlined before, there's professors already doing all sorts of those levels. So if they can jump in and watch a course, then that's a unique opportunity to learn, but then also pick what they're going to be comfortable with experimenting with. I think that with CodePath, for example, the courses we have 1,000 students going through our Tuesday evening and Saturday morning courses. So if anybody wanted to jump in and audit to see our course experience, then you can do so. You can do so any Tuesday or Saturday, jump in. And also wanted to share that, and maybe a reaction to David's point where he talked about that 2 a.m. example. So student support is so much more important. Not more important, but it's just you need to have extra layers in that online environment. And we've made standard in our courses 24/7 student support where you have that homework question at 2 a.m. and it's answered within 30 minutes. We also, CodePath is completely free to schools, completely free to any professors, completely free to students, has always been, will always be. So then we're happy to connect with anyone interested, free training, free TA training, free curriculum, grading, student support, where that's our core purpose and mission is help to support, empower educators. So you're not sure where to start, we're happy to jump in and see how we can help.
Jessica, one thing just to build on that, this moment has actually led to so many people out there just realizing, holy cow, I had no idea this was available. Like I had no idea these resources were there. And it has been an epiphany for a lot of folks. Now, a lot of folks like David and others have been around this for a while are like, okay, this was innovative in 1999, right? But for others, and we have to have some grace in this, which is like they were busy. They were doing day jobs that were very different. And now they're in here. And what they are finding is, wow, resources like Michael and what his company is leading and what other people are doing. This is where like suddenly we have this kind of moment where we have to figure out how we kind of embrace the learning that's going on right now and allow people the grace to innovate with it.
Yeah, it seems like people are kind of catching up finally, right, to where some of our forerunners have already been. I want to go back to this thing that you all brought up that was really fascinating about, the overlap between equity and innovation, right? And how this is such an awesome opportunity to really advance our equity agenda. But at the same time, there are a lot of dangers and risks, right? So I want you to just talk to me a little bit about how you both innovate and try new things while also not putting students at risk.
That's a great question. We spent a lot of time piloting and testing before we launched things across the institution. But I think the big aha is when you think about the equity issue, it's partly access to technology and the infrastructure that's necessary. But it's also meeting students where they are, having enough information to be able to meet students in an adaptive type of framework. And we've for many years used education to sort students rather than to serve students. And I think this has highlighted the need, equity issues have highlighted the need to meet students where they are and serve them. I love Mark's example of goal setting and the importance of goal setting in allowing you to meet students where they are and get them to the next level. And this incremental process in goal setting, I think is really critical to equity and justice related arguments, and not to focus on who's eligible for a certain opportunity or who has to go back into developmental work, as we used to call it. But meeting students where they are and giving them the opportunity to progress. And I would say too, to progress as quickly as possible. And this is where we haven't addressed. We've gotten anytime, any place, but we haven't gotten to any pace. And much of that's regulatory. We do have some examples where competency-based approaches are helping with that, but we've got a lot of work. If we're going to catch people up and give them fair opportunities, we have to make learning the constant and pace a variable. And right now, one of the biggest obstacles is pace is the constant and learning is the variable. Until we tackle that, I think we've got real challenges on the equity front.
I want to add, and I really appreciate those comments. I want to add that I think you want to focus on designing first for your most disadvantaged students and thinking about their emotional state in the classroom. And what tends to happen is when you put those most disadvantaged students first and front and center, then all the other students benefit as well. oh, we have
Absolutely.
extra tutoring, mentoring, support available. Well, great. Guess what? All the students are going to benefit based on how you change that classroom environment. I think there's also, you can be culturally responsive and extra supportive. So for example, do you have a lot of Black students in your program? Is it possible they may have been experiencing some trauma currently in the past 12 months? Have you invited any Black professionals to speak with them, to tell them it's okay, to make them feel like, you know, they're going to be able to keep going, to inspire them? There's a lot that is actually pretty easy to do. There's so many professionals that want to volunteer and help right now that I think it's just very important to make sure you understand who you're designing for, and you're very deliberate about that and intentional.
I could not agree more. I think this is a moment where we can pull together the professional wisdom that's out there. There are a lot of people who've devoted their heart and soul to trying to address diversity, equity, inclusion issues in the education context. And I think we can combine their professional wisdom with some of the modern data science to understand what's happening and what's working and for whom and in what way. And when you combine that together, you can do what Michael says, which is you design with equity in mind, which is, you know, if you're going to use design thinking, you always begin with empathy. You understand who those folks are and what their needs are. And then you begin that iteration prototyping and trying to figure out the outcome you're going to get. What you don't want to do is design something and then look to see if you have disparate impact and then try to react. That's the wrong react. What you want to do is design with equity in mind from the beginning. And I think one of the ways to get there is to one, honor that expertise that's out there. There is some real wisdom in our space. I think there are sometimes we infantilize faculty, we treat them like kids, and we think they should just do what we tell them to do, which is nonsense. There is real wisdom out there, and if we could listen with that, combined with the empathy and understanding of the actual students, then you can do what Michael's talking about, which is design with that equity in mind from the beginning.
Yeah, those are great comments. I really, I think that's so important to, you know, where we are right now and what we need to do going forward. I wanted to shift a little bit and talk about another pain point, which is assessments, right? That's something that we hear a lot about and that's come up a lot. You know, so as faculty are thinking about innovating in assessing learning for their students, you know, what are some perspectives that you have? What are things that you're hearing, you know, in the field right now? What are you thinking about even at your own institutions or in your own context?
I'm happy to start. I think there's so many aspects to assessment that you have to start by defining why are you, you know, what are you trying to accomplish with the assessment? So we spend a lot of time on formative assessments, where it's basically to get feedback back to the student, as well as understand how they're progressing through the learning experience. You're talking about assessment for the credential itself, whether it's a grade or a competency or a badge. Those are two different animals. So summative assessments are two different animals. In the online space, they become more important for a number of reasons, and many people think about kind of the authenticity and or the verification of academic honesty in the space. But it's much deeper than that. I think we have to think about summative assessments as being authentic and tied to the student's goals. And then we have to think about formative assessments as a very different animal, that we try to increase the pace of feedback. We try to align that feedback with the summative assessment. So it's a complicated ecosystem. What I would say about it is that most faculty members are not equipped, nor should they be, to tackle this by themselves. So we have to start thinking about how do we support faculty members and create assessment expertise. It's psychometrically sound and authentic, and not assume that, as they did when I taught my first course, that I knew something about creating an assessment in developmental psychology, because I had a PhD in developmental psychology with no background in assessment. You know, so we've got to figure out how do we put those systems in place that provide the right kind of feedback, as well as the credentialing aspect of the sorting. And so it goes back to that comment I made about serving and sorting. The formative feedback to serve our students and make sure that we're making the most efficient and effective use of their time, and then these summative feedbacks, which are a necessary evil in my mind of sorting and credentialing.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Michael.
Okay. Yeah. So I really agree with focus on what the outcome is. And so we look at an outcome of software engineering proficiency, and then we'll think about what's the percentage of our first generation college students who are also underrepresented minorities from low income backgrounds and also at low ranked computer science institutions that will get to, say, a tier 1 technology job like a Microsoft or Google after 1, 2, 3 years of CodePath courses. So it's holistic. It's thinking about that outcome, but then it's also thinking about who's the disadvantaged population that you're serving, and then how do you create that pathway that helps to support them. I also think of assessments from, we kind of like to flip it. So we like to assess before the course happens so that we know that our courses are the right size fit and that it's not the pacing and the rigor, it's not too fast, it's not too slow for the students. So every course there's an assessment, even it's in the course roster, but you need to do a coding challenge, which is a bite-sized version of that course so that we know that we're on the right track. I think the last area is the feedback loops are really, really critical. And yes, for educators, but even more so for students. And when you think of the assessment for them, that's not tied to a grade, that just makes them feel more confidence and makes them feel like they're getting it and makes them excited about their progress. I think that's another very important component that can be multiple times throughout a semester or, beginning, middle, end. As much as more is generally better, I think, from a feedback standpoint and a guidance standpoint.
Yeah, I think the assessment conversation is deeply intertwined with the craft of teaching and learning, right? The really good teachers have known for a long time the importance of having the right kind of an authentic assessment that is actually measuring something that matters, and they're doing it hopefully in a formative way that allows for almost academic momentum, right? I mean, faculty have learned a long time ago that doing a midterm and a final just doesn't work. There's not enough time to course correct based on the signal, right? Trying to get earlier assessment to figure out if that student is on track or off track. We've learned that trying to get smaller chunks with real authentic outcomes to help the student understand when they're off track or on track and help them get on track is a better way to go. And as that conversation continues, it brings up a number of things like, are we having good concrete conversations around the skills map, right? The learning maps for the students within these environments. Then are we measuring based on what's effective to measure as opposed to what's easy, right? So if you're just lean on multiple choice or worksheets, we know, I mean, every kid in K-12 in the world can talk about the disheartening effect of worksheets, right? It's easy to grade, but it's just painful to interact with, and that can't be the assessment, right? Yeah. So performance assessments in combination with different kinds of authentic in-context assessments would be even more interesting. But it all maps up to, as David's talking about, those summative assessments that tell you, has this person put together these things in a way where you can almost assess the capstone capability of that person to fully integrate it. And then it maps all the way up to their credentials. I just think there's a great conversation happening right now, all the way at the course level, down to the learning level, where people are trying to figure out that assessment map, all the way up to the credential level, where people are saying, what's the family of credentials that tell me? I mean, our president, Scott Pulsifer, is just a big fan of this idea of, can we give somebody a credential-rich pathway, where they're getting a family of micro-credentials and different degrees, so that we can really map what they know, so people know what they know. And not to mention, the data is just crystal clear. Those credential pathways and assessment pathways create academic momentum. Yeah. And especially for low-income first-generation students, letting people know you're doing it, you're on target, right? Let's just keep going. That's a good thing to do.
Yeah, we only have about 8 minutes left, so I want to just dig into this topic really quickly. We've talked a lot about faculty innovation and innovation at the course level. But one thing that we hear all the time is that sometimes there can be a tension between innovation at the faculty level and then innovation at an institutional level, right? And how those two things fit together. So I just wonder if you have any comments for maybe faculty who are looking to innovate, but maybe not finding the support that they need within their institution. How can you balance? What are some things that faculty can do at the faculty level, and then how does that fit in with what's happening at the institutional level? And
I think I'm just going to go. I'll go quickly. I think the best of institutions are institutions that are engaging their faculty and their student support staff, their financial aid staff, everybody across the institution understands that what they're doing can have an impact on that student journey. And really solid educational leaders involve a lot of voices in understanding that student journey and helping them innovate against that outcome. I think for faculty who want to be a part of that, I think one of the most important things is to anchor it in an institutional outcome that really matters. If you know your institution is really focused on DEI outcomes, show how your innovation is going to eventually lead to some kind of outcome in that area. If you know your institution is really focused on persistence rates or on graduation rates, how is this innovation going to link to that overall institutional outcome? It's always just smart to figure out how you can link the work you're going to do on this innovation to understanding sustainability and also kind of measured outcomes across that institution. And even if it's just that that's interesting, we're trying to figure it out, you got to just make the case about why is this going to be important and how we're going to get there. I think there's always this kind of mixed push and pull between kind of sanctimony and sustainability. And I think we had to break away from that dichotomy, right? What you really want is people who want to do something meaningful, something that matters, but it's also something we can sustain for the long run.
We're in the middle of this conversation right now, and I've been at most of my career. I've been at very traditional and selective institutions, and at National University as an open access institution, we're in a different place. But I've been at institutions where the faculty, innovative faculty, are butting heads with the institutional leaders because there are constraints on their ability to innovate. I'm probably in a different situation now where we're pushing for innovation at the highest level, that it runs into legacy models and faculty policies and shared governance that are as much a barrier to innovation or more of a barrier to innovation, especially if you start talking about tackling faculty autonomy within an assigned class and what they need to do in order to be more student-centric. In terms of aligning that experience with other experiences that the students have and inviting others into the exercise, other advisors and mentors and coaches into that experience. Because part of the challenge is that we've compartmentalized instructional support and non-instructional support in many institutions. And to have a holistic approach to supporting students, you have to break down many of those barriers between the instructional side of the institution and the non-instructional. Because as Mark said, these are behavioral issues and contextual issues that are interfering with some of our students' ability to move forward. And we all have to be working on the same team in order to create a holistic approach to advising and supporting our students. And that doesn't work in a traditional model where instruction and course assignment is in one bucket and other types of advising and student support is another bucket. And it works well in really small institutions where you all are around each other for periods of time. But at scale, where we need to reach large numbers of working adults, especially around equity-related issues, it's really imperative that we break down some of those silos so that we can create a much more holistic view to a student-centric approach.
Just to double down on what David's saying is, it is the institutions that have clarity about what their big picture goals are that are able to not just survive, but actually thrive in crisis. I mean, we're in the middle of major crises in the world of higher education, and crisis does not have to equal instability. The people who really get what they're about and they're really clear about their goals are able to get the best of their best, their faculty and their student support people and others to pull together around those goals and innovate. And that's where it gets exciting. That's where it's really interesting. Yeah. It is tough in institutions where that's not necessarily the case, where they're not shooting at the same goal or at the same target. Yeah. And I think that's the challenge that's out there.
Yeah, Michael, we have like 1 minute left. So do you want to give us some kind of final thoughts?
Just quickly. So yeah, we run 4 credit CS courses across dozens of schools. What we've seen work as an outside nonprofit getting in is bottom-up adoption and also aligning incentives while reducing friction for that adoption. So we will typically go on a campus through students, student-led, training students a semester in advance, And then all of that we offer ends up providing a way for professors to easily plug in, and all of that support, to give you an idea of the kind of incentives and friction. So if a professor ends up working with us, it saves around 60 hours per semester. Cal State University system estimates that for every CodePath course we run in a CS program, we save that CS department $10,000 to $20,000. And so the alignment of incentives by early adopting professors, by innovative students, has been very effective versus top down. We'll get introduced to a president, and then it's like there's a lot that the stars. So we've seen bottom up and appealing to the pain points professors have as being a very effective solution for accelerating innovation.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of my panelists for talking with us today about how we can really capture and unleash all the potential that we're seeing in the field right now for innovation. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you.